Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for coming. Our presentation is about JHipster Beyond CRUD. My name is Paolo Quaglia. I'm a senior project manager and a software architect. And with me, there is Enrico that will conduct the talk, and it is a senior software developer. We work for Intesys. Intesys is an Italian company. We are based on Verona, if you know it, where it is. We are a 100 employees company, and we work for enterprise industry, mainly banks, insurance companies, manufacturing. We have a development pattern that is designed to deliver, we name it. That means we put a strong emphasis, a strong stress on the design phase of our project. That means that we have a user experience development team and a design team. This strong emphasis forces us to build a high interactive application, and we choose a single-page application as mainly React, but also Angular, as our web application, and a mobile native application for mobile part. We choose JHipster as our backend to develop API and microservices. Okay, we started JHipster in 2017. With Intesys, we are the third JHipster bronze sponsor. We have almost 10 developers on average that are working with JHipster nowadays. We have already done 5 projects running in production, and we have 3 big projects in development phase. One of these is a non-banking application for one big bank, European bank. We have done some stuff for the community. We have modules and blueprints. We have just published 2 modules, and we have done some contribution of the community. So I'll give the floor to Enrico.
Okay, thank you. So hello everybody, thank you again to the JHipster team for giving us the possibility to talk. I'm gonna start telling you how we started with JHipster. The first project was not an enterprise project. Actually, it was a project for a wine reseller in Verona. Verona is quite famous for his wine. What the customer wanted was a mobile application needed by the sales people to go around and see show the products, show the catalogs. And so we basically prepared we developed 2 mobile apps, 2 native mobile apps, both Android and iOS, and the backend was made with JHipster. The backend APIs we used them both for the back office, so that the back office people could insert products, documents, images, and scale them and stuff. And then with some OpenAPI endpoints and authentication, default authentication of JHipster, we connected them to the app. It was a small project, simple app, few entities, few roles, some additional API first endpoint. We had a lot of fun. We were able to deliver it very, very fast. So we decided to go further and explore JHipster for something more complex. This is where we are now. This is one of our 3 big projects. In addition to mobile development and JHipster front-end development, we are also developing a React application built from scratch, which is the main point we are selling to the customer. So we are not building this up with JHipster. Still with JHipster, we are using it as a back office and highly customizing entities to allow back office user to configure all the product. And the React application is the one used by by the end users. It's highly interactive. It has dynamic forms. And a lot of stuff you have to configure. There's distributed cache, many native queries. There are 7 different roles and many teams involved. We didn't only act as a server, but also as a client to an IIS server developed by our customer. So we are not only providing API, we are also consuming them. And these 120 entities, which is quite a lot. We split them into JDL files so that we are thinking about splitting this huge monolith, this big monolith, to a monolith and a microservice. So we are thinking and figuring out how to do. We are still not in production. We are trying it, and we will see. So while we want to build this API-driven enterprise, we are basically helping customers to understand how designing API first is a real added value. This is the full picture. As I said, we didn't only connect JHipster as a server. We didn't only write server API, we would also consume them. And we connected JHipster with legacy databases, Liferay application, both for content management system and for delegating authentication to Liferay. And also consuming web services above AS400, SAP, and some ASB like TIBCO and other API gateways. So I'm talking about why we choose the title, Why Beyond CRUD. There are many questions that raised in our team, like is CRUD enough? How can I handle many entities and the OpenAPI endpoints? So I will compare code first and API first JHipster, how they can live together, let's say. I will demo some modules we have written and a sub-module in the JHipster main generator. It's under development. And I will tell you how easy it is to integrate Testcontainers with JHipster. Okay? So why Beyond CRUD? This is you all, JHipster developers, and you decide to create your monolith, just as an example. So the first thing you do is running generator JHipster, and you get the full stack, the Angular application, all the controllers, the user resource, the account resource. Soon after you have generated your application, what do? You pick up your JDL and you generate entities. So you have your entities stack, let's say. You're starting building CRUD with entities. Soon you will understand it's not enough, and so we have learned it from a presentation last year. We start extending entities, and I strongly suggest you to go to the videos of the JHipster Conf last year, and there's a very nice presentation by Antonio who explains this, how to do this. Then you start extending also default JHipster controllers, and then create custom controllers, because CRUD is not enough. You start creating custom controllers, but because maybe your DTOs design thinking about the database, in reality are not enough, and you have to customize even more. So you create custom controllers, and soon enough, external developers pop out. The first one is developing an Android application, and it's going to ask you, I need some DTOs, I need another API, I need another DTO. So what do? You create another controller. And then the React developer wants the same. And not only external developers, also JHipster developers want to interact with your application, with your API. And you want, basically, in this bunch of lines you see here, what you want is asking yourself, how do I make life easy for API consumers? We need interoperability. We need all the ecosystem to be productive. Everybody must be productive. You have to think about user experience when you design the APIs, and not only how the database is structured. And you have to think about developer experience, not only JHipster developer experience, but also for the developers who interact with your application. So JHipster already helps you with this. How many of you are using this in production or in development? How many of you are familiar with this? Good. Okay, won't lose so much time in describing this. Springfox is a Java library that scans all the controllers. It exposes a Swagger 2 specification to a well-known endpoint. And thanks to Swagger UI2, you're able to see how your APIs are done, try them. And this is already an amazing tool for developers. But we can do better. We can do some customization. And the first customization we often do, especially when there are external developers involved, is splitting this huge JSON file in many JSON files in such a way that you can group them by context. You can decide which APIs to show. Even there's already an option to filter out some endpoints you don't want to expose to Swagger. You can customize it even more and expose different endpoints. And you help developers to find what they need. or expose some APIs or not. This is just an example of how you can split the groups. Usually what we do is isolating the authentication API because we don't always rewrite them. So yeah, we isolate them so that also mobile developers, single-page application developers can use them. Another thing you can do, okay, this is how you can group the specification. This is just an example. I will link a GitHub repo at the end of the presentation with all these examples. And this is basically creating the authentication group using regex for the endpoints you need. But with this solution, you have to wait for the endpoint to be available. So you have to run your JHipster application, copy and paste the specification, and you need the endpoint to be live for other developers to download them. So what you can do is export them to JSON files. This is something we recently discovered thanks to the JHipster GitHub forum. And we have really started to do this. And to export these JSONs generated by Swagger, you have to run an integration test. You simply iterate over the groups, and instead of serving the specification via controllers, you just write them on your file system, and then, like with the Maven assembly plugin, you can deploy. You can put them in your Nexus repository, and as soon as you have your API and your DTOs and your APIs updated, you will be able to put this specification to the Nexus repository. So where we are now, we have two ways to interact with the back office with the JHipster stack. Let's say the blue lines indicates the JDL-driven communication, and it is mainly useful for your Angular frontend or your React frontend or even Vue.js. For external developers, you have the possibility to generate client code now because you have exported the specification, and you have also the possibility to give to developers just the APIs they need. For us, it's very important to really do in such a way that these guys can start developing as soon as possible, even in an asynchronous way. This is what we call code first. It has some limitations. As I said, API consumers have to wait. For now, only Swagger 2 is supported. Springfox, which is the library that scans the controllers when you have a lot of entities, is quite slow. So it can even slow down the startup of your application. And the security rules you find in your specifications, basically what you configure into your security configuration, have to be coded again if you want a really exact API as the security is configured in the Spring security configuration. So you have to code to align the security rules of Spring to the security rules of the specification. And API First Jhipster can somehow help you. Before talking about API First and Jhipster, the benefits of having API First are mainly because you put design in the first place, you have interoperability, you improve developer experience because you decouple client-server development. There is an approval process during API design. What we do actually for big projects is versioning our JSON files, YAML files, and everybody can contribute. If a guy from the front end need additional parameters on another API, he can just start code it, and then I will ask for approval via pull request or something. And also, if you do API first, you put API design, and you design your API with user experience and user interface in mind. So API First Jhipster, I won't get into the details. I strongly suggest to go to the JHipster Conf 2018 and see Christoph's presentation, and explains it very well. You just need to know that API First Jhipster, how many of you are familiar with this and are using this? Okay, not so many. You're basically putting this definition file in your resources, and it's an option you can enable when generating a JHipster project. And then thanks to Gradle and Maven plugin, you get all the code generated, and the only thing you have to do to implement these APIs is implementing a delegate. So to implement all the APIs like this one you are seeing in the backend, you just have to add a service and implement your API. There are a couple of tricks we usually do when we are going API first, and it's something we do kind of with every project that connects with the outside world. The first one is to add a suffix to the DTOs generated by OpenAPI, because so if some names overlap, you can distinguish between the JHipster DTO and the OpenAPI DTO. And use tags allows you to group the endpoints by tag and not by path prefix. So instead of having, let's go back, instead of having only one laser, this one, wow. Instead of having like one unique pets API here, use tags allows you to take these write pets and read pets and generate two separate delegates. This helps you when you have a lot of APIs to have the entry points of your application to be more faithful to what the API design is. Okay, so what changed now? We can decide that all the custom controllers we have talked before, they are no more created manually, but they are generated. So we are in a situation where the OpenAPI controllers are generated from OpenAPI plugin, and then they are again exposed thanks to Swagger to the developers. So we have kind of three ways for interacting with our application now. And I need water. Sorry. So we have three layers of communication. The first one is JDL driven, the second one is code first driven. And now, if you go and choose to go API first, you basically allow, you can see them from the green lines, to allow also the Angular frontend to generate the code and implement some custom pages and custom behavior that it's linked to your API definition. And also you are kind of decoupling the development for Android and React developers in this case. You also can notice you have two main layers once you decide to go with OpenAPI. This layer, this low layer, this OpenAPI layer, tends to increase and have a lot of classes as long as you decide to go with this tree. So you have to decide how to make this layer to interact with your CRUD endpoints. And with simple application, you can decide to take your OpenAPI services and go to your service layer in the DTOs. But this is something you can do only with simple application. If you have big domain, custom business logic, a lot of native queries that are needed only in this below layer, I still strongly suggest you to go directly to the repository, okay? So you're still taking advantage of many JHipster features like the liquid-based updates, the entity generation, security, but when you go API first, with big projects, you tend to skip the first two parts and use them for the customization and the back office. In this situation, the JHipster frontend used the JDL APIs, let's call them, for JHipster CRUD, administration, and customization. If you have both front-end developers and back-end developers developing on the same code base on a JHipster monolith, you have to have a good extension strategy to do in such a way that maybe the backend developer can generate and update the entity, and then front-end developer doesn't see the impact of this, and so you have to get a really good extension strategy. The API first endpoints can be useful for custom pages and pages that are designed before starting generating the database and the entities. What about external application? Actually, when this is something we did, like with mobile application, we usually extract the authentication endpoints via code first, and then all the other logic goes API first. But still, if you are flexible enough and you can somehow share in consistent way how your entities are shaped and share the specification, you can choose this hybrid strategy and go both, like, let's say, API first and code first. But when your app grows, and especially if there are other developers involved from other companies, or even your front-end team, which has 5 developers, and you decide to go API first, and you cannot mix the approaches, then we recommend, depending, of course, on your strategy, to go API first. Okay. Of course, this last approach have a lot of limitations if you think about the benefits of JHipster, because you might need to recode and write and define the DTOs again. Basic CRUD operation you might exploit, you might need from the CRUD stack. They have to be recoded in the specifications. So metamodel filtering and pagination, which are great features already natively introduced in JHipster, if you decide to go entirely API first, you kind of lose them, and you have to find another way to define them and make everyone to understand how pagination, metamodel filtering works. Okay, so you lose really a lot of benefits of this part. For what authentication is concerned, it happened to us that the default authentication wasn't enough, and we had to code it again. Maybe some custom fields or some different security rules or something different in the workflow that brings the user to your website for the first time. So we had to code it again, and again you have duplicated code. So API first is a good option, but it has limitations, and it really depends on how much interaction you have with the external world. Okay? So now, I'm gonna show you a demo. The first part will be about customizing some customization using a model we have written. The first thing that this model does is serving the API YAML statically, and so it's not generated by Springfox. It replaces Swagger UI2 with Swagger UI3 in an iframe. And by the way, don't be lazy like me. I coded this module because we needed them, but there's an open issue on GitHub. There's a bounty on it, and we need help to integrate it natively, Swagger UI3, in the JHipster. So if you can do this with a React component or with Angular, help us. I will help you to give you some suggestions on what are the problems in including Swagger UI3 in JHipster. And another thing that this module does is publishing the API version in console or in JHipster registry. If you publish the version in console, you can, or in the JHipster registry, actually we did it only with console, you can filter out the endpoints by API version, and you connect the console with the Nginx, HA proxy, or Fabio, which is another smart load balancer, and basically routing your API calls based on what's the API version contained in the API YAML file. The other demo, the other thing I want to show you is a preview of a module we are porting from this generated JHipster Swagger CLI. It allows you to generate Spring clients starting from an OpenAPI specification. Now we have only server-side generation thanks to this module, always written by Christophe. We are kind of we are now porting this inside JHipster in such a way that you can now generate server-side clients, but also in the future React and Angular code for interacting with the OpenAPI layer. Okay. I'm dropping the Microsoft. Okay. Non sono uscito. Okay, so here is the YAML specification I am including in a monolith I have already prepared. So you have already seen it. It's just the different version of the pet store, and I included into a monolith. In the monolith, which is this one, presentation. Okay. As I said, I coded the dockets in such a way that authentication and API first endpoints, this is the API first. So I'm kind of isolating the APIs that are defined via API first in such a way that you find them grouped as they are defined in the specification. So the outcome of this is that you go, here is the pet, it's just a simple entity, I already inserted some entries in it, and via API, you can see that I managed to group the endpoints by prefix, and then you have the other endpoints here divided, okay? So now I'm going to run the module and see what changed. So I write, yo, JHipster API utils. Please go. Now the first question is under which path you want to serve the statically the API YAML file. So I write API first. Okay. So yes, I want to add the version of the API to the service discovery tools. Yes, I want to use Fabio. I cannot explain it now. If you are curious about how Fabio works, just ask me later. So I just answer yes. And yes, I want to use Swagger UI 3 instead of Swagger UI 2. So I just answer yes to all this stuff. And let's see what changed. Oh. Like so. Okay. No. I cannot scroll. Okay, I'm going to do this open API. So the main point is this controller that thanks to this OpenAPI service goes inside your resources, parses the YAML file, and serves it statically to the Swagger UI. So the YAML file in this case is exactly the same as the one you defined with your colleagues, developers, other customer developers, okay? Then there is some customization, like console customizer, that publish the API version to console, okay? So here I have already console running, and if I go in console, I can see that among other things, why there are two services here, tags, not here, not here. You get the API version, okay? And what I was telling you before about Fabio is that he basically reads the tags of console and it interprets them as routing rules. So if you want to configure Fabio, you just start up it and then you publish the right tags in the console store. So Fabio will be able to route the traffic to your application. Okay, this is something that can be very useful in the development when you have different environments and stuff. Okay, so let's see the monolith. So localhost. Now I go to administration. And I see that I have included the Swagger UI 3, and you can use it. And you can also see that there is authentication already set, and there's a lock here to say that write pets is protected. So you need the authentication to go in, and this is something you really can use, and something that your external developers are familiar with. Okay, among other things. You will still have the API first endpoint I showed you before, but you can see the difference. This is the Springfox generated one, so it's not exactly the same. And then you have the authentication, and the default and the management endpoints, okay? So what I want to do now is to go and build a client with the new submodule in such a way that I can connect my microservice to these APIs, okay? So I already prepared a microservice, which is not here, but here. And what I do is writing JHipster OpenAPI client. Okay, now I have three choices. The first one is just give me a JHipster endpoint, and I will pass the Swagger resources, and I will let you choose which API to implement. Then otherwise, if you have many JHipster microservices together in your file system, you can point to a directory, and this module will go looking for the API YAML in the resources file. Otherwise, you can simply go and paste a URL or a path of your file system. I choose the first option, and I write the endpoint of my monolith. Okay. So now these are the same values you have in the Swagger endpoint. Because it's integrated with Swagger, it kind of extends, thanks to a bean, the Swagger behavior. And now I'm generating a client for the API YAML you have seen before. So the exact API YAML is versioned inside the project. I decide to call it pet store. And I want to save for future reuse. Okay, it's overriding something, not much. Okay, and while I'll explain you what changed, I start the microservice. So if we go and look at the client, you go to, sorry. Okay. Now you have, this code is generated inside, scroll. Okay. So you have these components, which are Feign clients, are integrated with the Spring Cloud Feign. And you can auto-wire them into your code to call in downstream other APIs. You can also, let's look at one. Very simple, you can override the URL by simply adding properties to your application YAML file. This is the first API, is right, and you can see it's very simple. Feign is very cool, has very cool features that map methods to downstream calls, okay? So what I want to do now is using this client in a dummy controller I have written. So I just have to auto-wire this and construct this controller, which is quite simple. I call the API list pets. So here I'm going downstream and calling the API endpoints, and then I'm iterating and to see and to return them to the controller. So now I go to the browser, I can type localhost 8081 pets, and if everything works, what happened is that if you look at here, you see that the microservice has called the monolith to get the list of pets, and then via Java maps to strings and return the list. Okay? This feature has still the pull request open. Okay. This feature has still the pull request open. We are working on it. I'm trying to understand really how the JHipster generation inside the main generation work, and thanks to the team for helping me and be so patient. So that's enough for the demo. The last thing I want to talk about is Testcontainers and JHipster. With our many applications we have developed, we have used SQL Server, Postgres, MySQL, and especially in big projects where you use native queries, custom SQL functions, or you are getting mad at trying to write your liquid-based changelogs, both for H2 and for your production database. So you write the profile, no, I'm in testing here, so I have to create this table. No, I am in production here. So with big databases and many entities, we kind of were starting getting mad. So we discovered Testcontainers, which is a library, Java. Who uses Testcontainers here? Who's familiar with Testcontainers? Okay. It's a Java library that wraps, thanks to this library, you can spin up any Docker container, any service that can be put inside a Docker container. It's becoming very popular. And in JHipster is very useful if you want to run integration tests, not only on H2, but also in a database which is the same of your production database. It's very useful for this reason, and also because with a lot of liquid-based changelogs, if you test them in your integration tests, you will discover before if you have problems and not when you are deploying the application for the first time. So this really helps. And the best thing is that to integrate test containers with JHipster, you have to change something like 7 lines in your test configurations. You just add that dependency in case of Postgres database. And then thanks to the magic of these 2 strings, the first one is a special JDBC URL with the TC prefix in it, and the other one is the test containers driver. With just these 2 modifications, you will be able to run integration tests on your production database. So these are the 3 steps. I won't get credit for this. There is a very nice article written by a member of the JHipster core team. I will link it at the end of the presentation so you can go there and follow the whole tutorial on how he did it. And he'll also explain how to integrate this with your continuous integration servers like GitLab using Docker in Docker. This is good. This is the easy way. But in our case, we need to do integration tests with a private database that has already been customized with some schemas and some data in it, and we couldn't really use Liquidbase for this. So we have done a module, and to run it, you just have to, I will show you in a bit. This way, you are basically overriding how the data source is instantiated. And what you're doing here via Java API, as I told you before, you are pinging up the MySQL container in this case, and you start it, and then you pick up the information from it to create your data source bin. Okay? To use it, you install it, you run JHipster test containers, and you can, in this case, choose if you want to run the tests in the with the profile, so with test containers, or still with the H2. Okay? So, recap. CRUD stack is the foundation of your app. If your app gets complicated, you can make it coexist with OpenAPI layer. Okay. Go API first for mission critical APIs. Otherwise, take advantage of the generated CRUD endpoints of JHipster. Use test containers for integration tests. As you see, is very useful and easy to integrate. And share your modules with the community. We can all take advantage of them. Okay, these are all the references. I will post the code in GitHub today or tomorrow, and it will be available at that link. And thank you. Questions? It's a Java API. Sorry. It asked me if the test containers is based on Docker. No, it's a Java API that wraps and kind of helps you to, via Java API, to spin up Docker containers from Docker files, Docker Compose files, or if you are using a common database, they have already the Java object prepared to spin it up and run it. But if you have a Docker file with, I don't know, a custom web service exposed on port 8080, and if you have a Docker Compose or a Docker file for it, you can use test containers to spin it up and in the test phase. Okay.
You mean it run without engine, without Docker?
No. Sorry, no. You need Docker, the Docker daemon below, and that's why for integration tests you need to, for example, in GitLab you have to add the Docker feature so that the daemon can talk to the host machine and run and interact with the Docker daemon. So you need the Docker daemon, and if you are developing, you need the Linux, the Mac, or Windows Professional. Otherwise, I don't think it works with the Windows Home and the Docker Toolbox. Okay? Yes?
One thing that wasn't really clear to me, in the API first, do you talk to the entities that you created out of the JDL, or those separate entities?
No, I'm mainly talking to JHipster entities and to JHipster repositories. But since when you do CRUD, you probably don't need so many customized queries. You don't need usually to go native and do native queries and optimize queries for what you're getting. So you use the same repositories, unless you need another view or an entity that you don't need to be JHipster managed. But mainly we interact with JHipster entities. So we still take advantage of the JHipster stack.
So it's a structured API on top of the entities that you have in.
Yes, I would say so.
But you don't have to keep two different separate definitions of the same entity, one in the JPA and the other one.
It depends. Because in some cases, if you model an entity thinking about how the database is structured, you model it in some way, and you can customize it using DTOs, and you can customize it. But sometimes, when you think about how the API are designed for the front end and how the database is designed, it's more convenient for you to have different, at least this is my point of view, to have different DTOs, so you have much more flexibility in customizing what's the UX, okay? Okay, thank you.